how you see the defense agenda in the context of what you call geopolitical commission. So, Madam, thank you again very much, and may I invite you to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Executive Director dear Jerzy. Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation. And for me, it's a big pleasure to be back to the European Defence Agency. You might not all know that for 5 years I had the honor to sit on its board. So I could witness firsthand the role of the EDA as the pivot of European defence cooperation. But I must also say in the last 4 years, I learned something about the EDA, and that is how you work not only with national defence ministers, but with all European institutions. And we've seen it since Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. All of Europe has sustained Ukraine's war effort. And of course, this has required a great deal of collaboration between different institutions, including the agency and the Commission. Our Defence Joint Procurement Task Force, for example, is helping us to match the demand of our member states with the production capacities of our industry. And together we have powered up Ukraine's resistance. We have demonstrated what we can achieve as a union when we join forces across borders and institutions and together with partners at NATO. And this closer defence cooperation will be more and more necessary. We all know that the strategic environment around us has fundamentally changed. And this creates a new kind of responsibility for Europe. I call it strategic responsibility. It is a responsibility, first of all, to support Ukraine in this war for as long as it takes. And this will not be easy, but it is exactly when our commitment needs to be rock solid. Russia is now reinforcing its positions, trying to retake the initiative. And this means that the situation on the battlefield remains very challenging. But this is not an argument against support. On the contrary, it is an argument for more support. Because let's not forget, when Putin invaded Ukraine, many of us thought it will only take days to take Kyiv. This has not happened. Currently, Putin does not even control all the territories he has already annexed. Ukraine has driven Russia out of half the territories captured after February 22. Ukraine has even pushed the Russian fleet in the Black Sea back and is able to deliver grain again through this maritime corridor. Finland has become a NATO member with a long border with Russia. Sweden soon will be. Ukraine is on its way to EU membership. And the Kremlin has deprived itself of access to Western economies and innovation systems and made itself dependent on China. We have achieved a lot together. And all these are good arguments for sustained support to Ukraine. At the same time, we must also look at Ukraine's security in the medium and long term. Ukraine must have the capabilities to deter further attacks by Russia. And this is why the EU's future security commitments to Ukraine are so vital. But strategic responsibility is not only about Ukraine. It is also about the other future members of our Union, like the Western Balkans, where long-standing local grievances are now being manipulated by external action. And if we look only a bit further, conflicts have multiplied all around our borders. I think, of course, of the Middle East, but also of the Sahel and the Caucasus. Globally, strategic competition is intensifying. Our partners are asking for greater European engagement in other parts of the world, such as the Indo-Pacific. And we must recognize that our security is more closely interlinked than ever before. We have learned that when a big country threatens a small neighbor, the whole rules-based order is at stake. And of course, our trade routes and supply chains are also exposed. Europe might be called to play a role in any of these theaters, near or far. So we need member states, armed forces, that are prepared for all sorts of scenarios, from traditional to hybrid, on land, at sea, in the air, in outer space, or cyberspace. We always say that our union was born as a peace project, and yes, this is right. But peace requires security. And that's why our union was also born as a security project. Its industrial genesis with coal and steel had a central security dimension. In those sectors, the common industrial policy was basically security policy. And then through the decades, this security dimension has grown. I'm not only referring to the birth of this agency or to our missions and operations. Most of our union's policies have direct security implications. Our transport policy for military mobility, our agricultural policy for food security, from trade to research, from energy to communications, at times of unprecedented threats, we must refocus our attention on the security dimension of all our policies. We must once again think about our union as intrinsically a security project. Of course, and this is very important, collective defense remains primarily the responsibility of the member states and of NATO. And we fully respect this specific point. Our cooperation with NATO remains central, it's excellent, and it is stronger than ever. But strategic responsibility also calls for stronger European contribution within NATO and to NATO. And since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war of aggression, the idea of strategic responsibility has driven our work on defense. So I want to focus today on how the work we have done so far can shape our future progress on European defense. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Defence Agency is about to turn 20. We've built our defense cooperation step by step, brick by brick. And when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, decades of patient, excellent work allowed us to react quickly and decisively. We have resorted every tool in our hands in unprecedented ways. Just let me explain a few of those. We had created the European Peace Facility to strengthen our role as security provider on other continents. Now, for the first time ever, we are giving military aid to a country at war right here in Europe. 5.6 billion euros coordinated at EU level to deliver tanks, helicopters, air defense systems, missiles and ammunition to Ukraine. We had organized training missions before. Now, for the first time ever, we're training troops involved in an interstate European war with a mission commanded by the new Brussels headquarters. We had created the European Defence Fund in PESCO, I remember that very well from my time as Defence Minister, to promote cooperative defence spending. Now, for the first time ever, we're mobilizing Europe's defence industry to sustain a war effort. The European Defence Fund has been complemented by EDIRPA, and it has led to ASAP. You know it well, the Act in Support of Ammunition Production. 480,000 rounds of artillery shells have been either delivered or are in the pipeline. And already next year we will be able to produce 1 million rounds per year. This would have been unimaginable just 2 years ago. And it already marks a massive step forward for our defence cooperation. What we have done would be extraordinary in normal times. But in these extraordinary times, it is not enough. The war in Ukraine demonstrates that we need to produce more, both to meet Ukraine's need and to ensure our own deterrence and defense. The war in Ukraine is consuming more hardware than any other war in recent history. Russia has fired 10 million shells in a year. Ukraine consumes 10,000 drones per month. This means that Europe's defense industry must mobilize too. The reality is that we did not have sufficient weapons and ammunition available, no large stocks, and the lack of spare capacity. Because in peacetime we thought we did not need them. This needed to change. So in July, NATO leaders endorsed a new NATO Defence Production Action Plan. And here in the European Union, we need to be laser focused on our own production capabilities. No industrial bottleneck should prevent us from securing Europe. There is no lack of European instruments at our disposal. There are projects of great interest, from long-range drones to a system to detect and neutralize sea mines that could prove vital, for instance, in the Black Sea. But overall, our instruments for cooperation are still punching below their weight. Now, the good news is that there's much greater scope for the necessary investments after the recent surge in many national defense budget. The 2% NATO goal is within reach for more and more member states, and this is good because strategic responsibility requires adequate defense spending. But how is the money spent? Collaborative spending by member states has only slightly improved. It is still below 20%, very far from our goal of 35%. And on top of this, the latest figures show that additional funds are in large majority spent outside the European Union. So, we are predominantly buying alone and buying abroad. And of course this is happening because of the urgency to get weapons to Ukraine and restock national inventories. But this wave of short-term acquisitions will have a long-term impact. First of all, it has an economic cost. When member states buy in an uncoordinated way, this may drive up prices. Secondly, it has a competitiveness cost for our industry. These investments could foster innovation and economies of scale in Europe instead of buying off-the-shelf products elsewhere. Thirdly, it has a military cost. There are way too many different weapon systems in Europe. And this leads to a lack of interoperability. There are many examples, but let me give you one. The Dutch-German brigade uses the same type of howitzer. But the Dutch have a certain type of ammunition for their howitzer. The Germans have a certain type of ammunition for their howitzer. And they are not interoperable. So both cannot each the one or the others. This is just one example. But you all know here in the room many other examples, and we could give you many other more. This cannot continue. Finally, buying alone and buying abroad may also have a security cost. We should not assume that we will always be able to rely on the international market for our defense procurement. We must look into our strategic dependencies to avoid operational consequences on the battlefield. And just like we need military readiness in a fast-changing security environment, we also need industrial readiness. This is an essential component of strategic responsibility. We must move from a logic of emergency response to one of long-term security. We need to make up for decades of underinvestment and fragmentation. And to overcome this, we need to spend more, spend better, and spend together. Ladies and gentlemen, transatlantic cooperation will remain essential, including from an industrial point of view. But we also need a stronger European reflex. We must think European from planning to procurement. And there are lessons here that we can learn from our recent history, beyond the defense and security field. In the 4 years of this mandate, Europe's way of doing industrial policy has been transformed. For instance, on hydrogen, on semiconductors, chips, or on critical raw materials. There was first a political decision taken at European level. Our Union agreed to focus on certain critical industries that are central for our economy of tomorrow. Then, we improved our rules to facilitate investment and innovation, for instance, with faster permitting and emergency frameworks. And finally, we backed our new industrial priorities with European and national funds to address market failures. And this is the approach that we would also like to replicate with the new European Defence Industrial Strategy. This European Defence Industrial Strategy will focus on 4 strands of work. And let me display them. First, strategic planning. Of course, we can build on the strategic compass and on the work the EDA is doing with member states to coordinate national defense planning. But to deliver on our strategic priorities, we need even more joint programming. We should identify flagship capabilities at European level, projects of common interest on which we must focus our efforts and resources. For instance, capabilities that are European by nature, like the strategic enablers like cyber capabilities or satellites or strategic transportation. But I also think of complex platforms that are beyond the capacity of individual member states, like air defense, and that can benefit from European scale. So we need a strategic planning function that ties together national and EU level planning. And this will give predictability to the industry and reduce fragmentation on the demand and supply side. Second, we need simpler and more efficient rules. Just like we did in other fields, we can use our regulatory framework to foster and to simplify cooperation. This is even more necessary in a heavily regulated sector like defense. So, in the consultation phase of our strategy, we will ask our industry how we can best support it. We need an updated regulatory framework to give the industry and member states predictability and coherence on a continental scale. My third point is maximize our dual-use potential. While we strengthen our defense-specific research and development, we should also better integrate civilian technologies in our defense industrial base. We have already done this, for instance, on military mobility. Dual-use transport infrastructure, you're well familiar with that, like roads and bridges that are used by military convoys, are essential for our security and deterrence. So we have worked with the transport community and accelerated the use of our funds and policies in that field. So there's a good example for that. It is still a work in progress, but it is already one of the success stories of European defense. And this dual-use model is also applied in other sectors. For instance, on satellites for global positioning and secure connectivity. We have already Galileo. We will soon have IRIS, which are EU assets and serve a military function. And we are laying the ground for a European cyber shield. So the European Union could have a direct role in creating new dual-use infrastructure, such as vital innovation with defense application that emerges from civilian activities. Important is now that we connect the dots. And for this, the Commission will set out options in a white paper on dual-use research. My fourth point is about mobilizing public and private funding. A suite of funding instruments is already available. But we must explore all possible ways to reward, to incentivize, and to compensate cost of cooperation and industrial competitiveness. The strategy will do so, including by suggesting new funding possibilities. We will propose a European defense industry program earlier next year. This will integrate the experience of ASAP and EDIRPA. And of course, without prejudging the negotiations on the future EU budget, it needs to be adequately funded. We're also looking at how to incentivize the transition from cooperative research under the EDF to the development and full-scale industrial production of defense systems. ASAP was a good first step, but of course it was limited to an already mature product, and this is ammunition. So we should look at the whole cycle of capability development, including the stage of industrial implementation and industrial production, all with a view to guide and support our defense technological and industrial base in light of our strategic priorities. And this would allow for greater coherence and coordination. But there are other options too. We are already working on a VAT exemption to support the joint procurement and joint ownership of defense capabilities. We have already called on the European Investment Bank to enhance its support to European defense industry. And this call was recently echoed by member states and the EDA steering board. Many thanks to that. So I believe it is time to finally move ahead now. We are looking at how the defense industry's contribution to the security of our union can be better recognized by sustainable financial investors, and how SMEs and startups in the defense sector can get access to growth finance. And we should finally also be open to lessons from our partners. Let me give you an example. The lesson how the United States create stable demand for industry, lower costs, and facilitate export transactions through their foreign military sales program. We should also explore synergies with other industrial policies, for example, our Critical Raw Materials Act that has identified some minerals that are needed for our defense and space industries. If we are to take strategic responsibility, we need these vital values chains. And this work can only be done on a continental scale. And finally, my fifth point. We must close the discussions on how defense investments can be taken into account under our fiscal governance rules, just discussed. As a matter of transparency, spending on defense must be counted in public debt and deficits, like any other category. It can and should meet two compatible objectives: ensure sustainable finances and support member states' investment efforts in strategic public goods. And this applies also to defense capabilities in response to the more threatening geopolitical context, especially because member states have very different starting points in this area. So, already in the Commission's proposal last April, we identified defense among the EU priorities for investment and reforms. This could underpin the extension of a member state's fiscal adjustment period. In Council, there is now broad support to consider increases in defense spending as a relevant factor. A relevant factor when we assess whether a member state has an excessive deficit or not. And there is room for further targeted and time-limited adaptation to reduce the near-term fiscal efforts for member states that are simultaneously increasing their defense spending. This could be particularly relevant for investments in the identified critical capability gaps. In addition, these investments would have to be European collaborative projects And this would generate a specific incentive for cross-border projects in Europe that are so much needed. If acceptable, co-legislators could consider these suggestions while finalizing the current proposals. This could be a game changer for the Union's defense and its defense industrial policies in these exceptional times. So, strategic focus, better rules, dual use, and funding. These are the four main pillars of our upcoming strategy. But at the end, there are some topics more that I want to raise about the geographic scope of our work. A strategic approach to our defense industry must also look into the question of Ukraine's defense capabilities on top of our own needs. Our strategy can only be complete if it also takes into account Ukraine's needs and Ukraine's industrial capacity. The first step to achieve this is to involve Ukraine in the consultation process of the industrial strategy. This should lead to integrating Ukraine in some of our defense programs, with the agreement of the European Parliament and the Council where necessary. This will not only help us cater for Ukraine's defense needs, it will of course also encourage convergence and joint planning between our militaries and defense industries. Ukraine is a future member of our European Union, so it must get much closer to us and much faster. And we should use all our tools to make this happen. Ladies and gentlemen, these last years have shown that when there is a political will, there is a way. When we come together, things that were stuck for years can start moving again. In these eventful times, we must be driven by a strong sense of urgency. And we must expand our cooperation as much as possible in the current institutional boundaries. But we shouldn't shy away from asking bold questions about the future of European defense. We will not be able to answer all these questions in the short term, in the few months ahead of the European elections. But we should still strive to set out a vision for the next steps and imagine how the industrial and security policy tools that support our strategic responsibility can help to complete our European Defence Union. To me, the most urgent would be to look into new possibilities for our defence cooperation under the current treaties. There are strong arguments to align the procurement conditions of the EPF and EDIRPA. Both can serve the immediate procurement needs of Member States and Ukraine, as well as reinforcing the European and Ukrainian defence industrial base. Both functions are vital to the long-term security of the Member States and of Ukraine. And while respecting the constraints of the treaties, I see scope to discuss whether at least that function of the EPF could be supported by the Union budget in a future multi-annual financial framework. These are questions that we should ask already today. And this is why we will already make proposals in our contribution to the leaders' discussions on the future of Europe that will be held under the Belgian presidency now this next 6 months or the first half of 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, our union's founders believed that defense and security had to be central in the European project. Today, this is more true than ever before. We have made tangible progress towards a European Defence Union, but the strategic challenges we face have grown even faster. Now, look at how much our Union has changed in recent years. When the pandemic hit, we all realized that we need more integration to address health emergencies. And since then, we have laid the foundation of a European health union. When Russia tried to blackmail us with gas, we all realized that we needed common investment, common action, and even common aggregate purchase of gas. And since then, the European Energy Union has advanced more than ever before. The next chapter is a full-fledged European Defence Union, so that Europe can finally take strategic responsibility for its own future. It is one of the big tasks that our Union faces for the years ahead. And I am confident that Europe will once again answer the call of history. Thank you very much, and long live Europe. Thank you. Hey, Joseph. Good to see you. How are you? No, good to see you here.
I was a fog in Brussels airport and I had to go to Leeds.
Oh, la la.
So,
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, thank you for being patient again for a few seconds. We will welcome soon the High Representative and Vice President of the European Commission and Head of the European Defence Agency, Mr. Borrell. So please remain seated for a few seconds. Thank you. Just testing the microphone. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome here my boss, High Representative and above all head of the European Defense Agency, Mr. Josep Borrell, who is going to give us his key note on the very theme of the conference. Please.
Good morning to everybody. I'm very glad to be here with you. I just come back from Skopje. The weather was very bad at the Brussels airport, so you have to divert to another airport. That's why I came late and I wasn't unable to listen to the full speech of the President of the Commission. But I am very happy to be here. Well, it's my duty to be here because as head of the European Defense Agency, I know how important it is, the role of this agency. It was important when it was created, and now it's more important than ever because we are living in troubled times. And it's clear that the European Defense Agency is an important tool to strengthen the European defense. This gathering brings together more than 1,000 participants from all key stakeholders, European Union institutions. President Michel and President von der Leyen attended this year's conference, which is a clear signal of the importance of the agency and the centrality of this event on how to power up our European defense. I will try not to say the same things that both presidents have already said. It will be difficult. It will be difficult because both has been delivering important speeches, and I was very happy that both the two presidents wanted to attend our meeting. Let's try to be a little bit more operational in order to look ahead. But let's also remind to all of us that to talk about defense is as old as the European project itself. To remember 1950. In 1950, the first idea about European integration was through defense. And it was a plan. It was a plan, the Pleven Plan, to build an European defense community. And the history would have been written in a different manner if the French National Assembly would have ratified the treaty that created an European army. In fact, governments agreed, but the French Parliament decided to say no for a coalition of the Gaullists, who were not very happy to see a French soldier under the command of a German officer, and the Communist Party, who was not very happy to increase the defense capacity of the Europeans in front of the Soviet Union. So for one reason or another, the fact is that this treaty was never been ratified. And then the founding fathers decided that maybe to go through defense was too hard, was touching too much the national fever, was touching too much the national sovereignty, and it was better to go through another way which was less sensitive, economics and trade. And then we went through the market, and we started creating the common market. When I was a young student, the European Union didn't exist. Only existed the common market. It was a market that was common. But it was a long time ago. Now, today, we are living in a completely different geostrategic context. And today, the European governments are undertaking the biggest rearmament effort in Europe since 1950. We are in a moment in which everybody agrees that it is necessary to increase our military capacities, to build weapons together, arguing that it would be cheaper, but also to strengthen the European defense capabilities from any point of view. And that's why, at that moment, we are living in a situation in which nobody doubts about the fact that Europe is in danger. As crude as this. I said that when I presented the strategic compass. Europe is in danger. And at that time people believe, well, that isn't a slogan. That's a slogan to sell the product. Because it was before the Russia war of aggression against Ukraine. It was before that, some weeks before. And it was before the major security crisis in the Sahel, where we still don't know exactly how to deal with. And certainly it was much before what's going on in the Middle East. So the feeling that Europe is in danger has been growing since the moment we presented the strategic compass. The Russia aggressions against Ukraine has reminded us how critical our military capabilities are. They were, and they still are. Talking about tanks, ammunition, artillery, talking about hybrid threats on space, on cyber, on critical infrastructures, on information manipulation, on security of supplies. All sense of being in danger, I think, has become real. And my job, or my portfolio, is about foreign and security. The term security was a second-rank issue because, well, security, we are not at war. We don't talk a lot about security. But now more and more the high rep is not only about foreign policy, it's about foreign policy, security and defense. And I was very happy to be able to have presented this strategic compass that will be for sure one landmark of the building of the European defense. And now we have to push forward. We have to push forward, moving from a crisis approach to a sustained strategy. Because we are living in crisis mode. There is an everyday crisis. And you pay attention to what's going on today, maybe tomorrow. But we have to switch to a sustained, strategically defined defense effort. Our reaction to the war in Ukraine, against Ukraine, has been, the President has explained, unprecedented on many levels, particularly in the military one. I remember very well on the first days of January 2021, 1 month before the war started, I visited Donbass and I had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Ukraine. And he asked me, they will invade me? No, it was not a question, it was an affirmation. They will invade us, and when this happens, will you support us? I'm sure he told me that you will not send your troops to fight together with us. You will not sacrifice the life of the young Europeans. But at least, are you going to provide us with the arms that we will need in order to defend us? And I couldn't give a positive answer at that moment. I was not sure that this could be what at the end has happened. At that moment I couldn't say, oh yes, be sure, we will. But when the war started, the answer was, yes, we will. The next time I see the Prime Minister of Ukraine, he was in the same office with a lot of sand sacks on the window of the office to protect against the bombs. Change had changed a lot, but then I could say, yes, we are supporting you. A taboo was broken. Military support to a country at war something that the European Union, as a European Union, not as member states isolated, had never done before. And since then, we have mobilized 27 billion euros on military support, not from the European institutions alone, altogether, member states bilaterally, plus through the European institutions, through the European Defence Fund. We have provided 27 billion of military support, which is far from being negligible. And we have been training 34,000 Ukrainian soldiers all over Europe. In almost all European countries, there are training activities, and we plan to continue increasing the number of trained soldiers until 40,000 in the immediate weeks. This is unprecedented. And we have been using innovative tools like the European Peace Facility, which was not at all conceived to support Ukraine. It was conceived with a very much limited amount of resources to provide arms to the partners, mainly in Africa, with where we were having training activities. But immediately after, the question was quite natural. If we are able to support in Africa people who are fighting against terrorism, why should not we support a country like Ukraine, who is fighting a full-range invasion? And this positive answer has changed the political landscape of the European Union with respect to our role as a security and defence provider. Now we are very much engaged on the joint procurement of ammunition. I want to thank the EDA for its work, organizing a joint procurement framework with 7 member states already placing orders for these framework contracts, and more will be signed in the coming weeks in order to reach this 1 million ammunition target that we set some months ago. We need to do much more to fulfill this target. We are not there yet. The European armies have been providing from their stocks about more than 300,000 shots. But we have to produce. And maybe we have to redirect our exports, because an important part of our production is being exported to third countries. And maybe today is much more urgent to provide this production to Ukraine, because some of the clients of our defense industry, good for them, they will not need this ammunition for tomorrow. They will stock it. So maybe they can stock less and provide more to Ukraine. With the same capacity of production, we can give more to Ukrainians. But certainly you have to increase our capacity of production, and the President has already explained, President Von der Leyen, how the Commission and my colleague Breton, with whom I am very happy to have such a positive cooperation, has put in place this act in support of ammunition production and this reinforcement of the Procurement Act, EDIRPA. This has been explained. I will not go into details, but this is an important way for the European Commission to participate in the effort of boosting the defence capability through boosting the defence industry capability. There is not a strategic autonomy without a strong defence industry capacity. But we know that today many European armies are buying a lot of their arms out of Europe. And we know that inside Europe we have a discussion about the fragmentation of our industry. And it is the old debate among economists. What is better, to have a small number of providers and to use economies of scale, or to have many in order to create competitivity and to boost innovation through competition? The economists have been discussing about that for years. Well, in the US they have a less number of providers for their military warfare than us, but they are asking themselves if this is a good solution and maybe they should have some more in order to boost competition and increase innovation. And later we will see that one of our weak points is research and innovation. But this is going on. How many industries, the fragmentation among member states, army, national security, national identity, rooted in the history, what kind of arms each army needs. It depends on for what they want to use these arms. It's not the same thing to face an invasion from Russia on the flatlands of Central Europe that go to the jungles of in somewhere, or to the deserts in Africa. You don't need the same kind of warfare. And in different scenarios, different member states have been forging their military history, their military capacities. The scenarios of war are different for ones and the others. And when we want to build a common approach, we have to take into account all that. And we do. And we do, and I think that we have been able to look for common ground and see altogether how we can address our weakness. Our mobilization for Ukraine has been impressive, but this war has exposed our lack of defense investment in the previous decade. Until 2014, the European has gone through a silent process of disarmament. Slowly, we were investing less in defense, and in 2014, Crimea invasion was the first wake-up, and since 2014 until now, we have continued increasing our defense expenditure. And last year, the defense expenditure of the 27 member states, 27, because this report, it is the first time that talks about the 27, because Denmark is included. And by the way, the report, now it puts names. Last reports, you couldn't see who is doing what. Now you see member state by member state. It has been de-anonymized. Now the press was criticizing us, saying, wait, but you don't tell us one by one who is doing each one of them, member states. Now you have it. And altogether we reached the figure of 240 billion. It is 70% more than in 2014. So in less than 10 years, we have increased our military expenditure by 70%. And last year, by 6% compared to 2021. And it shows that it is a sustainable trend. Compared with 2014, as I said, it is 70 billion more. 70 billion more, if I am not mistaken. It was 170, is about a little bit less of 50%, 40%. It's quite impressive. And it's accelerating. But if you want to compensate the under-expenditure of these years, you have to make the integral. You have to sum up all the years' differences, not just to have a look at the last year, but all the years. And there is a lot of support, a lot of money needed in order to fill in this hole. An important thing is that our expenditure privileges investment. Investment has increased the figure of 58 billion, which is almost about 25% of the defense expenditure. It is the 4th year in a row that defense expenditure investment is increasing inside the total figure. In 4 years in a row, we are increasing our material capacity, and it's good because we had a benchmark. We said defense investment has to be 20% of the total expenditure. Okay, we are at 24%. We are above the benchmark. And what about the relationship with our gross domestic product? We are far away from the 2% target of NATO. We are at 1.5%. It means that if we were at the 2% target, we should add to this expenditure, we should add about 75 billion more per year. Certainly, it's going to be difficult to ask the Ministers of Finance to make this big effort in a single budget period. But keep figures in mind. We have increased a lot. We still are 1.5% of the GDP. By comparison with the US is about 3.5%. So they spend 2 points more of their GNP than us. And Russia, certainly Russia is at war, has been increasing its expenditure from 3.6 of the GDP to 0.43 last year, an increase of 70%. This is certainly a war economy. And they have to do that because they have been losing a lot of military capacities. But 70% increase on their military defense capability is a lot. So we are doing well, but we still lack a lot of critical capabilities, and we need to invest more in defense. This is a message that, as High Representative for Security and Defense, I have to address to the European governments. And not only we have to spend more, not only we have to invest more, we have to do it in the more cooperative possible way. We have to do it together, to fill gaps, to avoid duplications, and strengthen industrial capabilities, to take care of our strategic enablers, in which we have a certain weakness. I said from the beginning of my mandate, we have to do more and better together. And this should not be a slogan, it should be a reality. And in order to build this reality, we have tools. We have the coordinated annual review on defense that shows us what do we need to do. We have the permanent structured cooperation, PESCO, and we have the European Defence Fund from the side of the Commission that will provide additional financial support. On PESCO, we have 68 cooperative projects, but I think that we have to increase the level of our ambition, because these projects are important, but they are on the periphery of the military capacity. Why we could not think that the next generation of warships could be a PESCO project? We have to have a strategic review of PESCO. We launch it, and this is an opportunity. I'm addressing the managing of the EDA. This is an opportunity to think bigger. PESCO project has to touch the core of the military capabilities. And this idea of thinking of the next generation ship as a PESCO project is something that would enhance the role of the European Defence Agency. We have our capability development plan, which defines which are our priorities. And the 27 Ministers of Defence agreed on which are these priorities. And the industry has to have the capacity to supply. But the military responsibles have to have the demand side. The defense industry has to produce to fulfill the needs and requirements of our armies. And it's up to our armies to define what do they need. And the industry has to follow. The industry has to produce what we need. But what do we need has to be defined. And this exercise of defining our needs is what the European Defence Agency is doing. It's a clear roadmap, it's a clear map of what our European armies need and what the industry has to provide. We have defined 5 strategic domains in land, in air, maritime, cyber and space, and the strategic enablers that are crucial as force multipliers. And then we have to do also something that is close to this expression, to put boots in the ground. I mean, we have to have military capacities to be able to be deployed under the European Union banner. It's not the European Army, but it's the rapid deployment capacity. To be able to deploy quickly a capability of intervention in some scenarios in which it's clear that going together we multiply our capacity and we decrease risk and cost. This is the most important part of the strategic compass, and it has to be a reality by 2025. I will not be here, but I want to let to my successor everything in order for this being a reality. And we started doing that in Cádiz, and thank you to the Spanish presidency, for the first ever European Union live military exercise, with I think it was 9 members of the European Union deploying navy, air and landing capacities, not in the framework of NATO, but among us as a prefiguration of the deployment of this force in 2025. And thanks to Germany for being ready to do the same kind of exercises next year. Another example, 2 days ago, I was not able to attend the inauguration, but in Portugal, we opened the multinational helicopter training center in Sintra, where the already existing EDA programs gathered together in order to train the crews for helicopters of 16 member states. It's another way of creating economies of scale and making our people working together and sharing not only the technical capability, but this sense of community, this sense of partnership, friendship, comrade, that makes the important part of any army. This is something that IDA is pushing. It's not just a paperback. It's just something lively, involving people, involving capacities in some concrete places, doing concrete things that increases the interoperability of our armies. This is the way. We have to aggregate demand and procure together. Instead of going to the industry one by one without a clear horizon, we have to aggregate demand and to give a clear horizon to the firms. Because if I were a leader of a defense industry and I was going asked to increase my capacity of production, the first thing I will ask is going to be a solvable demand? And for how long? And this is what we have to define. Otherwise, it will not be investment. Aggregate demand and procure together. The ammunition, the first thing, but others will have to follow. Because we need a stronger, resilient and innovative European defence industry. Important for Ukraine, important for us. If we can increase our capability together with the Ukrainian capability, much better. We have created immediate responses, but we need a more strategic thinking and acting. And that's why, together with the Commission, we are working on this European Defence Industrial Strategy. And once again, I want to thank Commissioner Breton and his Commission services for the good cooperation between an intergovernmental body, as it is the EDA, and a community body, as it is the internal market and the industrial regulation of the European economy. We have a challenge, which is the access to public and private finance. The financing of the defence sector has to be addressed, and the joint statement endorsed by the European Union defence ministers earlier this month, during our last board of the EDA, sends a clear message in this regard. I was very surprised when some important European banker told me that his risk committee would not advise them to finance defence projects. How is it? It looks a little bit strange that at that moment our risk management people could say, no, we don't invest, we don't support financing the industry, because there is a kind of negative connotation about investing on defence. This is a cultural fact. Our society has to understand that they need to invest in defence. Everybody prefers water to canyon, but sometimes if you don't have canyons, you don't have water. And that's important to bring to the mindset of the European people that defence expenditure is not just a waste of money, is an existential requirement for Europeans to face the challenges of our world. And this is a task for the politicians, for the ones who go to ask for the vote of the people, the ones who explain where tax money goes, in order to make a choice between social needs, which are certainly very important, but also to make clear that defence is a boost for the economy, is a job creation process, is an innovation process, and is the basis of our security. And there comes the weak point. I said we are spending more, we are investing more. Unhappily, the figures show that in research and technology we are not doing as well as needed. And the expenditure in research and technology has decreased in 2022 with respect to 2021. Not a small decrease, it's almost 6% less. And this we cannot afford. This we cannot afford. The new generation of arms will not grow up into trees. They will not appear by an accident of nature. It will be the result of our engineers working, researching, investing, discovering how to make better use of all the materials and technologies. We have to reverse urgently this trend. This is a warning. We cannot spend more, invest more, and research less. Because if we want to be at the forefront of the military capability, it has to be through research and technology. And to develop better the state of art of our defence, we have this hub for innovation at the European Defence Agency. We can play a role in this context. Later today we will award the EDA Defence Innovation Prize, but we cannot continue investing on the tools of the past. We have to create the tools of the future, and that requires research and innovation. In conclusion, defence has come a long way during the last years, and I don't see our geopolitical environment to improve. By the contrary, what I see is a clear deterioration and degradation of our geostrategic environment, and this requires us to do more and in a closer coordination among us. The same ambition applies to the defence sector, the same ambition applies to the industry and to the cooperation between our armies. Because the transformation that Russia started aggressing Ukraine and the trends in the world with more and more contestation about the role of the West with respect to so many conflicts, some of them we are not talking about, but they exist. Who's talking about the situation in Sudan? Who's talking about the Corn of Africa? Who's talking about Sahel? Who's talking about some conflicts which are still there for years and years? It looks like our society can only talk about one crisis at a time. And now is the crisis in Palestine and Israel. But the war in Ukraine continues every day with a high toll on human lives. So we cannot decrease our engagement with our defense and in our support to the defense of Ukraine, because at the end it is the same fight, the fight for our existential, and we have to make the sacrifice and the efforts necessary, supporting our armed forces, developing our defense capacity, and making understand our societies that this is the challenge for today and we cannot miss it. Thank you.